Greetings, my fellow freedom lovers and sovereign thinkers. Thank you for tuning in to LO3 Podcast. My name is Craig, transmitting from the beautiful swampy mangrove of South Florida, and today's date is Wednesday, February 24th, 2021. Nice breeze out here, and beautiful evening in Fort Lauderdale. Cloudy. Looks like the worst is done. There's some rain here and there, but that's all right. So, this one just caught my eye, and I believe it has to be addressed. Of course, you hear all the mainstream, all the stuff that's going on, but this one here is, you can say, pertaining to heritage, history, and so forth. Yes, that's called the Jungle Queen boat, giving the tour all over Fort Lauderdale. So this one here came from the Abbeville blog. And this one here is entitled The Death of the Museum of the Confederacy. It is by Valerie Protopapas. And it came out today. Let's see what she has to say here. Nice little building, too. In May of 2008, I became embroiled in a situation that had developed with the former Museum of the Confederacy. Having received an email sent to the membership from Director S. Waite Rawls asking for an opinion about removing the word Confederacy from the museum title, I assumed that he was taking heed from ongoing crusade against all things Southern and advised him to hold his ground in the face of such politically correct extortion. Alice, my answer was not what the gentleman wished to hear, though he never responded to me. For Mr. Rawls was of the opinion that that any mention of the Confederacy or the Confederate was beyond the pale, and the time had come to abandon such nomenclature. All right, sorry about that. Today, that great shrine has become the American Civil War Museum after being joined to the Black-run Tredegar Ironworks under the Parks Department. Having been informed that a great deal of skullduggery was afoot in Richmond, I determined to see if I could make sense of what was happening. What followed was an article entitled The Museum of the Confederacy, a brief look at the worsening situation. Following an exchange of emails, the article began with an examination of the museum's origin. The original spirit of the Museum of the Confederacy, the glory, the hardships, the heroism of the war, were a noble heritage of our children, to keep green such memories and to commemorate such virtues. It is our purpose to gather together and preserve the executive mansion of the Confederacy, the sacred relics of those glorious days. And that was first from the appeal for donations to the museum in January 1892. In the need of an organization to preserve a true and faithful record of the gallant struggle made by the soldiers of the South for independence being keenly felt, the Confederate Memorial Literary Society was chartered and organized under the laws of Virginia. Its object being to teach all future generations the true history of the war and the principles which these soldiers laid down their lives. That was the introduction page on that for the Confederate Museum. We must pray that others will rise up to carry on the trust. Former board president Sally Archer Anderson, 1926. Every treasure donated to the MOC was with the understanding that the institution would honor its founding principles in perpetuity. No such revered relics would have been turned over any Yankee institution. I then documented how things had changed and not for the better, and followed with more narrative regarding the ongoing crisis. Warnings of a new direction. We're the Museum of the Confederacy, not the Museum for the Confederacy. That was Robin Weed, who was the former director from 1988 to 2001, approximately. It is not a memorial or a shrine. It is a museum and a research center. President Director S. Wade Rawls. Antecedents of the current situation. President Director S. Wade Rawls has rightly declared that the Museum of the Confederacy should tell our story. And by that, one assumes he means the story of the attempt by certain southern states to secede from the Union, including what brought the people to those states to this position, what they did, and the constitutional basis for their actions. The war they waged against the attempt by the federal government and the states remaining in the Union to forcibly return to them, to that entity, and so forth. Unfortunately, those who Rawls has chosen to tell that story are men like Gary Gallagher, co-author of The Myth of the Lost Cause, and Erwin Jordan, a so-called black Confederate expert whose book refers to these brave black men who fought beside white Confederates rather than in a segregated command under white officers as zealots of the wrong. Sorry about that. Nor is Rawls the first administrator who seemed to think that our story is best told by what General Robert E. Lee called those people. Indeed, Rawls was the last of the rather long and sorry parade of like-minded leaders. One of his predecessors opened the museum for lectures by such experts as Alan Nolan, author of the book Lee Considered. Nolan, a lawyer from Wisconsin, is a notable champion of the Union's Iron Brigade, and no friend of Lee or the South. In 1999, curator Melinda Collier was quoted in an article of the museum's plan for the 130th year exhibit on Robert E. Lee, that the exhibition would attempt to explain how this man, who led a traitorous army, nevertheless rose from the status of the sectional luminary to one of America's foremost heroes. More recently, continuation of this apparent celebration of all things, hostile to the Confederacy and its heroes. The prestigious Jefferson Davis Award was bestowed upon a work entitled Reading the Man, a portrait of Robert E. Lee, through his private letters by Elizabeth Brown Pryor. This book was advertised as a revelation of Lee, based upon newly discovered correspondence, but rather is a politically correct character assassination consisting of the author's perceptions of Lee, supposedly validated by a very few previous unpublished letters. Of course, there were kudos from the usual establishment, historians and critics, and the outcries from museum members about what was either a total lapse of judgment or another example of a deviation from the museum's goals and policies to its founding principles. Given what has happened since Director Rawls' installation, one has to wonder just whose story this gentleman wanted told. The attitude that Rawls was ostensibly attempting to counter by virtue of his ongoing collaboration with these foes of Southern culture, history, and heritage was clearly enunciated by Arthur James McPherson. In 1999, McPherson had an interview with leftist notable Ed Sebesta on the subject of the museum and this Lone Star Ball fundraising event together, with Sebesta's views on his historical Confederacy and modern organizations connected with it. Sebesta declared that the Sons of the Confederate Veterans and the United Daughters of the Confederacy were created with the motive of celebrating Confederacy, including the use of slavery in the Confederate economy and white supremacy. Okay, I'll carry on here. The interview with McPherson included a following statement. I agree 100% with Ed Sebesta about the motives or the hidden agenda, or such groups as the United Daughters of the Confederacy and the Sons of the Confederate Veterans. They are dedicated to celebrating the Confederacy and a rather thinly veiled support for white supremacy. And I think that also is the hidden agenda of the Confederate flag issued in several southern states. So, what can you say about that? Deception. Absolutely. Deception. Remember, folks, the victors wrote the history books, and all you folks out there, prove to me that the United States government declared war to the Confederate States of America on a constitutional basis. I want you to prove that to me. Because the truth of the matter is, it was a new republic separated from the United States. Okay? So that's not a civil war. Civil war is a faction fighting, battling within that particular nation. Okay, that represent that country, the factions going at it. That's what a civil war is. Okay, and I'm from New York, and that's what makes what's so great about it, because I could always observe these things, and I take the time and I take the initiative on reading on these areas the best I can. So I will continue on here. Apparently, however, the MOC's administration had made sufficient brownie points with McPherson for him to state that the institution had changed its orientation from its original purpose of celebrating the Confederacy. Over time, and especially in the last decade or two, said McPherson, it has become a much more professional, research-oriented, professional exhibit-oriented facility. In other words, the politically correct McPherson approved of the MOC's present orientation. Thus, the actions of Director Reed and Curator Collier, among others, had won over McPherson and perhaps some of the leftist fellow travelers, but in doing so, did their actions compensate for the abandonment of the original mission of the MOC and their betrayal of most of the present contributors to the museum, of whom one must doubt that either McPherson or Sebesta, in fact, are. As a further attempt to vitalize the institution, Rawls told a reporter that he was thinking of partnering the MOC with the Slavery Museum in Fredericksburg and the Planned Museum at Fort Monroe, should the MOC be moved in whole or in part of those locations. Fort Monroe was a haven for runaway slaves. Any museum that location would be principally devoted to that issue. Yet Rawls seemed unconcerned that such institutions tend to be extremely one-sided in their treatment of the very complex subject of slavery, as well as being rapidly anti-Confederate in their focus. But Rawls' conciliatory efforts were not universally successful given the considerable number of negative responses from Lexington's black community and its white supporters. When they discovered that Lexington was being considered a site for the museum, one, Al Hockaday, owner of 2 local stores, voiced his irrational concerns about the impact on Lexington as a whole. I think the negative impact will be more than a city could bear, and further predicted that the minority enrollment would drastically diminish at the local universities because the museum would erode the town's social climate. One wonders about the intelligence of people who entertain much less publicly expressed such grossly irrational and supremely ignorant viewpoints. Nonetheless, despite their stupidity, Rawls assured Mr. Hockaday and others that the MOC was not a memorial or a shrine. It's a museum, a research center. Cheryl Wagner, director of marketing for the Rockbridge Tourism, declared that there have been miscommunications about the name. We have to consider that the name is about learning, not promoting the Confederacy. Apparently, Rawls believed that these are the people and the communities that will enhance the future of the museum. If so, one has to wonder what sort of future Mr. Rawls envisioned for the institution if he found such sentiments both acceptable and positive. Director Rawls also determined that the Museum of the Confederacy needed the blessing of the NAACP. The ongoing assault by that organization on all things traditional, Southerner, or Confederate is undeniable. And in fact, its actions have prolonged its existence far beyond reason, why garnering considerable profit from being offended by all things Southern and demanding that they be removed from sight, never again to see the light of day. But though no official blessing was forthcoming from these overly sensitive souls, when Rawls approached them at one meeting, our intrepid director was thrown a crumb for his conscientious groveling when the Spotsylvania NAACP graciously consented to consider the matter, providing, of course, that the MOC told the whole story of the Civil War. Those familiar with the lexicon of the political correctness know instinctively that this means tell it our way or else. Yet consider Mr. Rawls' understanding of the patrons he wished to attract to the MOC. In a statement made to the Fort Monroe organization, Rawls complained that those criticizing the museum had misperceptions and that its visitors were, in Rawls' words, not the redneck in the pickup truck with the white t-shirt that you might think of, but according to Rawls, well-educated, retired, married couples who are history buffs. These sentiments, clearly illustrative of Rawls' elitism, require no comment. They speak for themselves, and frankly, as a well-educated, retired history buff, I take great offense at them. Finally, according to the report on the Fort Monroe Plan by Conover Hunt, the authority's interim executive director, they would bring in experts in African American history, Union history, Confederate history, with said experts collaborating and offering comprehensive plan for a museum campus. But the question then was, whose experts? Did anyone seriously believe that they would not be the same experts who have been defining era's history for decades? Consequently, did any intelligent person believe that the Confederacy would receive objective, fair, and balanced treatment? The answer to that, I believe, was painfully obvious. And with regards to the NAACP, Rawls is on record on saying, one of the things I would love to have in the Museum of the Confederacy here is an NAACP meeting. It would send a signal to all Americans about what we're all about. It would certainly do that. But to the people for whom this institution is not just a collection of relics from the dead past, the signal sent by such an arrangement would be unjustifiable, undesirable, and given the NAACP's sordid history, intolerable. The crux of the problem was brought to the light in April 4, 2007. Newspaper article in the Washington Post under the headline, "The One-Time Shrine of the South Faces an Uncertain Future. History's Changing Tide." Attendance for the MOC has dropped by nearly half over the past decade, and this is in Richmond, the capital of the Confederacy. It may even have to change its name. The same doleful report said the Museum of the Confederacy, though it has made efforts to distance itself from being an unabashed shrine, it still conjures up in the public mind images of slavery, racism, and intolerance. It carries enormous intransigent and negative intellectual and emotional baggage. Look, another prostitute newspaper, Washington Post. Think about that, folks. The article then quoted Rawls as saying, the museum was where Confederate veterans came to give their items to make a statement. Richmond was the epicenter of the Civil War. So yes, there's a symbolic message to our movie. And can't we all just guess what that message was? But, the article continues, is also about a historic shift in the mindset of the white South, whose psychological underpinnings were held together for more than a century by a romantic idea of the lost cause of the Confederacy. This held the antebellum world as a largely mythological place, a land of moonlight and magnolias, of Gone with the Wind, of mint juleps, and Henry's Timrod's ode to the Confederate dead at Magnolia cemetery. Stop, angels, hither from the skies. There is no holier spot for ground. Then we're defeated, valor lies, swept away by history. These sorts of atmospherics floated about in the cultural ID, but the tangible remnants of the belief were preserved here. The MOC. Robert E. Lee's uniform, the plumed hat of G.E.B. Stuart, hundreds of battle flags, thousands of soldiers' letters from mud-filled trenches that soon would become their graves. People brought such things from across the war-ravaged South. Thousands of them artifacts presented with such reverence that were called sacred relics. I ended this expose with what I consider to be the only legitimate conclusion to the course matters we're taking. Conclusion. So here in a nutshell, in the course of which the administration of the MOC has chosen to embark and the reasons for that choice. Though the North is filled with shrines to those who died in order to coerce the South by military might back into a union that the vast majority of its people rejected. The South apparently is not permitted any such shrine to the memory of those who resisted that tyranny with their last full measure of devotion. In fact, it probably won't even be permitted to retain as historical relics the artifacts of its past because they offended the sensibilities of the politically correct. Black and white. In the meanwhile, it seems that the present administration of the Museum of the Confederacy is doing its damnness to make the transition from the shrine to tomb as rapid and as covert as possible. Not too long after the article appeared, I once again attempted to discover something about the museum that I might find heartening. Below are the excerpts from emails from myself to the museum board and Mr. Rawls, to which he responded with one of those liberal shibboleths that has destroyed the U.S. Constitution. Dear sirs, I just received your email in which you mentioned that you're trying to raise $10,000 to support the mission of the museum. However, I would like to know just what that mission is. I have copies of the founding documents of the museum, and I know its original mission. However, what I have seen recently, that mission may no longer be relevant. Indeed, some actions by the director and the others in the board show a very troubling move towards the same political correctness that has poisoned. That has poisoned the culture and almost destroyed our rights under the First Amendment. The United States is filled with politically correct shrines to what has passed for history since the end of the War of Secession. That are about 20% fact and 8% myth and mendacity. I am deeply troubled that the Museum of the Confederacy is moving irrevocably and at great speed to join that throng. I received the following answer. Valerie, I have been watching a lot of the email and blog traffic from you and others, and I am pleased that you contacted us directly because it may give us the opportunity to clarify some of the misinformation that is out in virtual space. Like the U.S. Constitution or the Constitution of the Sons of the Confederate Veterans or that of the United Daughters of the Confederacy, documents like these do change over time to incorporate the changing times around us. Otherwise, there would be no freedom of religion, women would not have the right to vote, and there would be no free speech guaranteed. That's by weight. My response. Dear Mr. Rawls, things change, that is true, but we've seen that those changes are not always for the better. Indeed, they are frequently for the worse. The belief that the Constitution is a living document has quite frankly led to the Constitution becoming a more or less a dead letter. See the state of Oklahoma's new resolution regarding the federal government and the 10th Amendment. Freedom of speech and religion to which you allude were in the First Amendment of the Constitution at the beginning. They did not evolve over time and frankly are now in danger of being abrogated by the very types of change you seem to value. Political correctness, hate speech, hate crimes, all of these have changed. The Constitution, and like so many other changes today. Not for the better. It is a fool who, having found that he is on the wrong path, refuses to return to the right one. As for your mission statement, I have no problem with certain terms and conditions, to wit, display, study, commemoration, and the preservation of the history and artifacts of the Confederate States of America. I do, however, have a very real concern about the interpretation clause. Given the actions I have seen taken by the MOC till now, I am not at all sanguine that the interpretation of which you speak will be in keeping with the museum's founding principles. And while I agree that means and methods change over time, or we'd all be driving ox carts, interpretation has no need to change. The MOC can remain true to its founding principles while incorporating any necessary changes, unless, of course, there is a desire to depart from them. If that is the case, then that departure will certainly occur under the auspices of interpretation as presented in your mission statement. There are museums which exhibit the relics and the people of the past, but pay no homage to either. Yep. So far as I know, that I was not the founding principle of the MOC, and any deviance from those founding principles is a betrayal of those persons who initiate and sustain the institution over time. Indeed, you are correct. These changes have happened over the years, but like the changes to the Constitution, they represent what we are. At times, principles and actions diametric to that which they purport to uphold, as that is in fact the case. Such changes do not become valid simply because they have occurred. Were that so, then anything that happened, good or ill, would be acceptable and worthy of continuance simply because it happened. I am relatively new to this field, I admit. I do not profess great expertise, but I know a snow job when I see it. The history presented today by most Orthodox historians is about 20% fact and 80% propaganda. One would think that at this late date, efforts at objectivity would be in the works. Lincoln would be revealed for what he was and not the plaster Satan years of the Yankee propaganda has made of him. One would hope that the atrocities committed by men like Sherman and Sheridan would have been made public. But only a few historical revisionists, as they are called, are making what actually occurred known. And all of their work is rejected outright by the very men whom you consider worthy to help guide the MOC into the future. Well, if they don't, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to know what that role will be. McPherson et al. Plus the NAACP equals another Yankee monument to the Civil War, an erroneous term in and of itself. I don't doubt that it will present secession as illegal. It wasn't. And that the war was to free the slaves, also untrue. Mr. Rawls isn't the exhibits make this Museum of the Confederacy, but the ideas and the spirit which not only celebrate the attempt by 11 states in the South to escape the looming bondage of an all-powerful central government while finding nothing intrinsically wrong in that attempt. I cannot see the MOC under the present administration or many of the recent post-administrations. As for yourself, admit having anything, either those ideas or that spirit. I see only one more PC tribute to the mendacious myths perpetrated by people who know better but cannot abandon their well-cherished beliefs. Since there are more than enough Yankee shrines in the nation, I hope you will forgive me for not wishing to see the MOC join them, and for doing anything and everything I can to work against that ultimate false. Valerie Protopopoulos. I received no reply. One of the things I always tell everybody, you have to look at all sides of what occurred. There's so much information pertaining to this horrific event. And they want to trim it down in the public education, even the colleges. It's very disturbing indeed. That's why I've always been real intrigued. I'm reading all that the best I can. Learn much more of it. Because I find it's essential. Because if you don't learn from the past, folks, we'll be damned to repeat it. And what we're seeing right now in the United States is very similar with the friction that occurred in the 1850s and early 1860s. Centralization, tyranny, been going on for a very long time. When white privileged Biden got in office, he's not my president because his merits are heinous. He has all these other clowns coming in. All these Huey and Deweys that believe they're above everybody, we should revolve around them. Well, this is why I always support the 10th Amendment. And I always respect the Confederates, the folks those 11 states that seceded from the United States during that era. It's always the principles, my friends. They even had slaves in the North around that time, too. All you gotta do is look it up. And many of them that supported the Confederacy many of them were Jews, Hispanics, and blacks. The Klan does not represent the Confederacy. The white supremacists and white separatist groups do not represent them either. That's not more than a facade. Folks, I should check out H.K. Ederson and look up blacks in the Confederacy. There's some real cool videos on that. And even some of the people that had their grandfather all that served, they had photos. It's very cool. It's time to go back in those days and understand why this occurred. And you got the PC crew, the Marxist hacks, the censor fanatics. Don't want us to learn these things. I encourage every single one of you out there, no matter what you look like, where you come from, what your ethnic background is, to study this at the best of your ability and share it with your family. I do that. And trust me, you respect it a lot more. Always good to remember, the past is today's greatest teacher. Nothing more, nothing less. And that will be it. I'll thank everyone for listening. Plus, feel free to download and share this throughout your social media networks. If you have any questions, comments, or if there's something interesting you want to check out, whatever you do, please send your correspondence to Decorum. Furthermore, I'll leave the footnote, of this episode on my speaker page. If you want to contact me, you can hit me at LokiLuck number 03 at protonmail.com. Or if you want to donate, you can hit me at paypal.me or cash.app/LokiLuck number 3. If you want to send contributions to the Abbeville Institute, that will be beautiful. Once again, thank you for your time. Plus, always remember that the demoniac resistance is healthy for the soul and can liberate humanity. Until next time, take care of yourselves. Keep on spreading love, and may your guardian spirits be with you.